Sam's body lay crumpled on the cold concrete stairwell, a deep stain marking the concrete beneath him. His eyes stared upward at nothing, wide with the shock of betrayal, while Cherry crawled away from him screaming, her manufactured terror echoing through the empty corridor. The knife clattered to the floor beside his lifeless hand, and in that moment the truth was already being buried under layers of calculated lies. This was how Sam's story ended, but to understand how a good man fell into such a perfect trap, we have to go back to where it all began, in the suffocating walls of a maximum security men's prison in Texas, where Sam first learned that survival behind bars wasn't about strength or honor, it was about knowing when you were already beat. 3 weeks earlier, Sam walked the cell block of Huntsville maximum security with the kind of confidence that came from 5 years on the job. He was a correctional officer, not the biggest or the toughest, but he knew the rules and he followed them. The inmates respected him because he was fair, never cruel, never soft. He kept his distance, did his job, and went home clean every night. That was the plan anyway, until the day Marcus Tate called him over to his cell with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Officer Sam, got a minute?" Marcus said, leaning against the bars with his arms crossed. He was a lifer, mid-40s, with a reputation for being smart and patient, the kind of inmate who played chess while others played checkers. Sam stopped, keeping a few feet back. "What do you need, Tate?" Marcus grinned wider. "Need? Nah man, I'm good, but you might need to hear what I got to say." Sam felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his face neutral. "I'm listening." Marcus pulled out a small envelope from under his mattress and slid it between the bars. "Open it." Sam hesitated, then picked it up. Inside were photos printed on plain paper but clear enough to make his stomach drop. They showed him outside the prison at a gas station talking to a man Sam barely remembered. The man was his cousin's friend, someone he'd met once at a barbecue months ago. But in the photos it looked like a transaction, like money was changing hands, like Sam was dirty. "What the hell is this?" Sam whispered, his voice tight. "That's insurance," Marcus said smoothly. "See, I know that guy you're talking to. He's been moving products for my people on the outside, and in these pictures it looks like you're part of the team. Now I know you ain't, but the warden, internal affairs, they won't know that. All they'll see is a dirty co making deals." Sam's hands trembled as he stared at the photos. "This is a setup. I didn't do anything." "Doesn't matter what you did," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Matters what it looks like. And right now it looks like you're on my payroll. So here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna bring me a few things, nothing crazy, just a phone, some tobacco, maybe a little something extra now and then. You do that and these pictures disappear. You don't." Marcus leaned closer, his eyes cold and merciless. "I'll make sure you end up here with me, and trust me, Officer Sam, you won't last a week on my side of the bars." Sam felt the walls closing in. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced through every possible way out, but they all led to the same place: ruin. If he reported this, they'd investigate him, suspend him, maybe fire him. If he didn't, he'd be a criminal, a smuggler, everything he'd sworn never to be. But the fear in that moment, the raw, primal terror of losing everything, made the choice for him. "I'll think about it," Sam said, his voice barely audible. Marcus smiled like a predator who just tasted blood. "You can do that, but don't take too long. The clock's ticking." Sam walked away, his legs heavy, his mind screaming. He didn't sleep that night. He stared at the ceiling of his small apartment, replaying the conversation over and over, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. By morning, he'd made his decision. He wasn't going to be Marcus's puppet. He was going to end this the only way he knew how. The next day, Sam returned to Marcus's cell with a different kind of resolve. He waited until the cell block was relatively empty, then he stepped close to the bars and spoke in a low, hard voice. "I'm not doing it, Tate. You can take those pictures and shove them. I'm reporting this." Marcus's smile faded, replaced by something darker. "That's a mistake, Sam." "Maybe," Sam said, "but I'd rather lose my job than my soul." He turned to walk away, but Marcus moved fast. The cell door wasn't fully locked, a trick Marcus had learned months ago by bribing another guard, and he shoved it open with a violent crash. Before Sam could react, Marcus was on him, fists flying, a hidden shank glinting in his hand. Sam fought back, throwing wild punches, but Marcus was bigger, meaner, and had nothing to lose. The shank sliced across Sam's cheek and a fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling to the floor. Alarms blared. Guards rushed in, pulling Marcus off and dragging him back to his cell, but the damage was done. Sam sat on the floor, a stain marking his face, his body aching, his mind numb. He tried to do the right thing, and it had nearly cost him his life. Hey my people, if you're feeling this story so far, do me a favor and drop a like right now. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love connecting with y'all. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button, because this channel is all about real, raw storytelling that hits different. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get back to Sam, because his nightmare was just beginning. An hour later, Sam sat in Warden Mills's office, his face swollen and stitched, his eye blackening. Across the desk sat the warden, a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for running a tight ship. Beside him stood Tim, Sam's supervisor, a decent guy who'd always had Sam's back. "What happened out there, Sam?" Warden Mills asked, his tone clipped. Sam swallowed hard. He couldn't tell the truth, not now. If he mentioned the blackmail, the photos, the whole mess would explode and he'd be finished, so he lied. "Tate was being unruly," Sam said, his voice steady despite the pain. "He refused a direct order, got aggressive. I had to use my nightstick to subdue him. He got a few hits before backup arrived." Tim nodded, backing him up. Sam's one of our best. If he says Tate was out of line, I believe him. But Warden Mills didn't look convinced. He leaned back in his chair, studying Sam with a gaze that saw too much. You've been working on this block for 5 years, Sam. Never had a problem with Tate before. Now suddenly he's trying to take your head off. People snap, Sam said, but even he could hear how weak it sounded. The warden was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. I don't know what really happened out there, and frankly, I don't care. What I do know is that you're compromised. Whether it's Tate or someone else, you're a target now. I can't have you working with male inmates anymore. It's a liability. Sam's stomach dropped. Sir, I can handle it. No, the warden said firmly. You can't. Effective immediately, you're being transferred to the women's facility in Los Angeles. It's a lateral move, same pay, same benefits, but you're done here. Sam wanted to argue, to fight, but he had nothing left. He nodded, defeated. Tim clapped him on the shoulder as they left the office. It'll be fine, man. Women's prison, that's easy duty. You'll be back on your feet in no time. But as Sam walked out into the Texas heat, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking straight into another trap. Would the women's prison really be the safe haven the warden promised, or was Sam about to discover that danger wore a different face behind those walls? He was about to find out, and the lesson would cost him everything. The Los Angeles Women's Correctional Facility sat under a relentless California sun, its white walls gleaming like bleached bones in the desert. Sam pulled into the parking lot 3 days after leaving Texas, his face still bruised, his pride still shattered. He told himself this was a fresh start, a chance to leave the chaos behind and do his job without looking over his shoulder. But as he walked through the security checkpoint and heard the heavy steel doors slam shut behind him, that familiar knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He didn't know it yet, but he just traded one kind of hell for another, and this time the danger wouldn't come with fists and shanks. It would come with smiles and soft voices, and by the time he realized what was happening, it would already be too late. Sam's first day started with orientation in a small conference room that smelled like stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Sitting across from him were 3 women who would become his colleagues. Officer Diane Brooks, a tall black woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Officer Rachel Kim, younger, sharper, with the kind of alertness that came from seeing too much too soon. And Miss Marianne McCluskey, a staff instructor and counselor who'd been working in women's corrections for over 15 years. She was the one who did most of the talking. Welcome to Los Angeles, Officer Sam, Mariam said, sliding a folder across the table. I'm sure you're thinking this is going to be easier than where you came from. Let me stop you right there. It's not. Sam shifted in his seat, his bruised ribs still aching. With all due respect, ma'am, I've worked max security for 5 years. I think I can handle myself. Diane let out a short, bitter laugh. That's what they all say. Rachel leaned forward, her expression serious. The women here don't fight the same way men do. They won't rush you with a shank or try to beat you down in the yard. They're smarter than that. They'll study you, find your weaknesses, and exploit them before you even know you're being played. Mariam nodded. They use emotions, Sam, tears, flirtation, sob stories, anything that makes you feel like you're helping them or connecting with them. And once they have that emotional hook in you, you're done. You'll do things you never thought you'd do, and you won't even realize you're compromised until it's too late. Sam wanted to take them seriously, he really did, but after everything he'd been through with Marcus, the idea of being outsmarted by emotional manipulation seemed almost laughable. He'd survived blackmail and a brutal beating. How dangerous could a few words and tears really be? I appreciate the warning, Sam said, keeping his tone respectful, but I know how to keep my distance. I won't be a problem. Mariam studied him for a long moment, then sighed. I hope you're right, because the ones who think they're immune, they're the ones who fall the hardest. The meeting ended and Sam was assigned to B Block, a medium security wing that housed about 80 women. As he walked the corridors that first day, he felt a strange sense of relief. The atmosphere was different here, quieter, less violent. The women watched him as he passed, some with curiosity, some with indifference, but none with the open hostility he'd faced in Texas. Maybe he thought this really would be easier. Maybe he could finally breathe. He made it through his first week without incident. The work was routine, supervising mealtimes, conducting cell checks, escorting inmates to appointments. The women tested him, of course, with small requests and lingering looks, but Sam kept his responses curt and professional. He was polite but distant, never engaging beyond what the job required. He started to relax. He started to think he'd been given a second chance. That's when Cherry entered his life. Her real name was Cheryl Ann Davis, but everyone called her Cherry. She was 28 years old, serving 7 years for armed robbery and assault, and she was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous even from a distance. She had smooth brown skin, high cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to see right through you. But it wasn't just her looks that made her dangerous. It was the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she could make you feel like you were the only person in the world who mattered. She was a predator in every sense of the word, and Sam was her chosen prey. It started small. Cherry would smile at him during head counts, not flirtatious exactly, but warm, friendly, like she saw him as more than just a guard. She'd say things like, "Morning, Officer Sam, hope you're having a good day," or "You look tired, you okay?" Little comments that felt harmless, even kind. Sam responded with brief nods, keeping his guard up, but he'd be lying if he said he didn't notice her. Everyone noticed Cherry. Then one afternoon during recreation time, Cherry approached him while he was monitoring the yard. She stood a respectful distance away, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression innocent. "Officer Sam, can I ask you something?" Cherry said, her voice soft. Sam kept his eyes on the other inmates. "What is it? I know you're new here," she said, "and I know some of the girls can be difficult. I just wanted to say if you ever need help understanding how things work here, I've been here 3 years, I know the dynamics, I could help you navigate it." It sounded reasonable, almost helpful, but Sam remembered Mariam's warning. This was exactly the kind of approach they'd talked about: building rapport, establishing trust, creating a connection. "I appreciate that," Sam said flatly, "but I'm good." Cherry smiled, not offended, just amused. "All right, just thought I'd offer." She walked away and Sam felt a small surge of pride. He'd handled it. He'd kept his distance. He was in control. "Fam, if you're hooked on this story, I need you to do something for me real quick. Smash that like button, drop a comment telling me what you think about Cherry, and subscribe if you haven't already, because this channel is built on community and real storytelling. Y'all are the reason I do this." Now let's get back to Sam, because Cherry was just getting started. Over the next 2 weeks, Cherry's efforts intensified. She'd find reasons to be near him during shifts, always maintaining plausible deniability. She'd drop a book and bend down slowly to pick it up when he passed. She'd laugh a little too loudly at something another inmate said, making sure Sam was watching. She'd brush past him in the corridor close enough that he could smell her soap and whisper, "Excuse me, officer," in a voice that lingered in his mind long after she was gone. Sam tried to ignore it. He really did. But Cherry was relentless, and worse, she was patient. She never pushed too hard, she never crossed a line that would get her written up. She was playing a long game, and Sam, despite all his training and all his warnings, was starting to feel the pull. One evening near the end of his shift, Cherry approached him near the cell block with a troubled expression on her face. She wrapped her arms around herself, looking smaller, somehow more vulnerable. "Officer Sam," she said quietly, "I'm not feeling well. I think something's wrong. My chest hurts and I'm dizzy." Sam's instincts kicked in immediately. Medical emergencies were serious, especially in a prison where delays could mean lawsuits or worse. He grabbed his radio. "I need to escort an inmate to the infirmary," Sam said into the radio. "B block, Davis, Cheryl." "Copy that," the voice crackled back. Cherry leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, her hand pressed to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't want to make a fuss, but I'm scared." Sam felt a pang of sympathy. She looked genuinely afraid, and despite everything, he was still human. He was still someone who wanted to help. "Come on," Sam said, "let's get you checked out." They walked through the corridor together, Cherry moving slowly, Sam staying close in case she collapsed. The infirmary was on the second floor, accessible by a stairwell that connected the cell blocks to the medical wing. It was a route Sam had taken a dozen times before, always without incident. But as they reached the stairwell, Cherry paused, her hand gripping the railing. Can we just stop for a second? I need to catch my breath." Sam hesitated. The stairwell was empty, quiet, and something in the back of his mind screamed at him to keep moving, to get her to the infirmary and get this over with. But she looked so weak, so fragile, and he told himself it was fine. Just a few seconds, what could happen? Cherry leaned against the wall, her breathing shallow, and then she looked up at him with those devastating eyes. "You're different from the other guards," she said softly. "You actually care." "I'm just doing my job," Sam said, but his voice lacked conviction. Cherry stepped closer and Sam's pulse quickened. He should have stepped back. He should have ended this right then, but he didn't. "Are you really?" Cherry whispered, her hand reaching out, brushing against his arm. And in that moment, Sam made the fatal mistake of hesitating. What happened next in that stairwell would seal Sam's fate forever, but was Cherry really sick, or was this the trap Mariam had warned him about? The answer would be written in the end. The stairwell was silent except for the sound of Sam's breathing and the distant hum of the prison's ventilation system. Cherry stood inches away from him, her hand still resting on his arm, her eyes locked on his with an intensity that made his chest tight. Every alarm in Sam's head was screaming at him to step back, to end this moment before it became something he couldn't take back, but his body betrayed him. He was frozen, caught between duty and desire, between what he knew was right and what felt impossible to resist. Cherry leaned in closer, her lips parting slightly, and Sam's resolve crumbled like sand beneath a wave. He didn't know it yet, but this single moment of weakness would cost him everything. His job, his reputation, his life. And Cherry knew exactly what she was doing, because this wasn't seduction, it was execution. Sam's hand moved almost on its own, reaching up to touch Cherry's face, his fingers trembling against her cheek. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for just a moment, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It felt real. It felt like a connection, like something mutual and genuine, and that was the most dangerous lie of all. "We shouldn't," Sam whispered, his voice hoarse, but even as he said it, he didn't move away. "I know," Cherry breathed, stepping closer until there was no space left between them. "But don't you ever get tired of doing what you're supposed to do? Don't you ever just want to feel something real?" Sam's heart pounded in his chest. Everything about this was wrong. He was a correctional officer. She was an inmate. There were cameras, rules, consequences that could destroy him. But at that moment, none of it seemed to matter. The loneliness he'd carried since Texas, the fear, the shame, all of it melted away in the warmth of her proximity. He was tired of being afraid. He was tired of being alone. And Cherry, with her soft voice and knowing eyes, made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. He leaned down, and their lips met in a kiss that felt like falling off a cliff. There was no going back now. The line had been crossed, and Sam knew it, but he couldn't stop himself. Cherry's hands moved to his chest, then to his shoulders, pulling him closer, and Sam let himself get lost in the moment, let himself believe that this was something more than what it was. But Cherry's mind was somewhere else entirely. Even as she kissed him, even as she played the part of the willing lover, her thoughts were cold and calculating. She'd been planning this for weeks, studying him, learning his weaknesses, waiting for the perfect moment. And now, with Sam distracted and vulnerable, she reached into the waistband of her prison uniform where she'd hidden a sharpened piece of metal, a makeshift blade she'd crafted from a piece of broken bed frame and spent hours filing down in secret. The guards had missed it during the last cell search, a careless mistake that would now prove fatal. Sam felt her hands move lower and he started to pull back, some part of his brain finally registering that something was wrong. "Cherry, wait!" But it was too late. Cherry's expression changed in an instant, the softness vanishing, replaced by something cold and vicious. Her hand shot up with the blade, and before Sam could react, she struck him in the neck with brutal precision. The impact was immediate and overwhelming, stealing his breath and sent him stumbling backward. He tried to grab her wrist, tried to stop her, but she was already moving, striking him a second time, disabling him instantly. A bright spray hit the stairwell wall and Sam's legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed to the concrete floor, his hands clutching desperately at the wound, trying to stop the flow, but it poured through his fingers like water. He tried to speak, tried to call for help, but all that came out was a choking noise. His vision blurred and the world tilted sideways. He looked up at Cherry, confusion and betrayal written across his dying face, and she stared down at him with cold, empty eyes. "Nothing personal," Cherry said quietly, wiping the blade on her uniform. "You were just easy." Sam's body convulsed once, twice, and then went still. His eyes remained open, staring at nothing, while the stain beneath him continued to spread. Cherry stood over him for a moment, making sure he was dead, and then she carefully placed the blade in his hand, wrapping his lifeless fingers around it. She messed up her own uniform, tore a small hole near the collar, scratched her own arm hard enough to draw blood, and then she took a deep breath and let out a scream that echoed through the entire facility. "Help, somebody help me. He tried to rape me, help. Hey my people, I know this is heavy, but I need y'all to stay with me because this story gets even deeper. If you're feeling this, drop a like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel because we're building something special here. This is real storytelling, no fluff, just raw truth. Now let's see what happens when the guards arrive." Within seconds, the sound of boots pounding on metal stairs filled the air. Officers Deanne Brooks and Rachel Kim burst through the stairwell door, their hands on their weapons, their faces tense with adrenaline. What they saw stopped them in their tracks. Sam's body lay crumpled on the floor, surrounded by a large stain that was still spreading. His neck was clearly injured and his eyes stared upward in frozen horror. A few feet away, Cherry sat against the wall, crying hysterically, her uniform torn, her arm bleeding, the blade lying on the ground between her and Sam's body. "Oh my God," Rachel whispered, her face going pale. Diane immediately grabbed her radio. "We have an officer down in stairwell B. I repeat, officer down. We need medical and security now." Rachel rushed to Sam, dropping to her knees beside him, checking for a pulse even though it was obvious he was gone. His skin was already cooling, the stain pooled thick and dark around him. She looked up at Diane and shook her head slowly. Cherry continued to sob, rocking back and forth, her voice broken and trembling. "He said he was taking me to the infirmary, but then he brought me here. He tried to touch me and I said no, but he wouldn't stop. I grabbed the blade to defend myself. I didn't want to kill him, I just wanted him to stop. Please, you have to believe me, I was just trying to protect myself." Diane stared at her, then at Sam's body, her jaw tight. She'd seen enough crime scenes to know when something didn't add up, but she also knew that Cherry's story was exactly the kind of narrative that would play well in an investigation. A male guard and a female inmate alone in a stairwell. A struggle, self-defense. It was almost like a textbook. More guards arrived, sealing off the area, calling for the warden and the medical examiner. Cherry was carefully escorted away, still crying, still playing her role perfectly. Diane watched her go, a sick feeling settling in her stomach. "Something's not right," Diane said to Rachel. "Look at Sam, look at the wounds." Rachel knelt down again, examining Sam's body more carefully. The wounds were consistent and deliberate, not the wild, defensive strikes of someone fighting off an attacker. There were no defensive wounds on his hands, no scratches or bruises that suggested he fought back. And Cherry's injuries, a small scratch on her arm and a torn uniform, seemed almost staged. "She's lying," Rachel said quietly. "This wasn't self-defense." "I know," Diane replied, "but proving it, that's going to be the hard part." Within an hour, the scene was swarming with investigators. Warden Mills arrived from Texas, having been notified immediately of Sam's death. He stood in the stairwell, looking down at the body of the man he'd transferred here, thinking it would be safer, and his expression was unreadable. Beside him stood Tim, Sam's old supervisor who'd driven through the night to get here. His face was pale, his eyes red. "I told him he'd be okay here," Tim said, his voice breaking. "I told him women's prison was easy duty." Warden Mills didn't respond. He was too busy studying the scene, taking in every detail, every inconsistency. Finally, he turned to Miriam McCluskey, who'd been standing silently in the corner, her face carved from stone. "What do you think?" the warden asked. Miriam stepped forward, looking at Cherry's so-called injuries, then at Sam's body. "She killed him, premeditated, probably been planning it since he got here. The question is why." Does it matter? Tim asked bitterly. He's dead either way. It matters, Miriam said firmly, because if we don't understand how she got to him, we can't stop it from happening again. The warden nodded slowly. Get me everything, security footage, witness statements, her full history. I want to know every move she made in the last month. As the investigation began in earnest, Cherry sat in an isolation cell, her tears long since dried, a small smile playing at her lips. She'd done it, she'd won, and unless they could prove otherwise, she'd walk away from this as the victim, not the killer. But could they prove it, or would Cherry's performance be enough to bury the truth along with Sam's body? The answer would determine whether justice would be served or whether Sam's death would be just another tragedy lost in the machinery of the system. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that cast harsh shadows across Cherry's face. She sat at a metal table, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes red and puffy from hours of manufactured tears. Across from her sat Warden Mills, his expression carved from granite, and beside him stood Miriam McCluskey, watching Cherry with the kind of quiet intensity that came from years of reading Liars. They'd been at this for 3 hours, going over her story again and again, looking for cracks in her narrative, but Cherry never wavered. She was a master at this game, and she knew that all she had to do was stick to her script and wait for them to give up. But what Cherry didn't know was that, while she sat here playing the victim, a team of investigators was tearing apart every detail of the crime scene, and the evidence they were finding told a very different story than the one coming out of her mouth. Warden Mills leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Cherry's face. Let's go through it one more time, Miss Davis, from the beginning. Cherry took a shaky breath, her lower lip trembling in a performance worthy of an Oscar. I already told you everything. I wasn't feeling well, so Officer Sam said he'd take me to the infirmary, but when we got to the stairwell he stopped. He told me to wait, said he needed to talk to me about something. I thought maybe I was in trouble, for something I didn't even do, but then he grabbed me. Grabbed you how? Miriam asked, her voice calm but probing. By the arm, Cherry said, pointing to the small scratch on her forearm. He pulled me close and said I'd been teasing him, that I knew what I was doing. I told him no, that he was crazy, but he wouldn't listen. He tried to kiss me, and when I pushed him away, he got angry. That's when he pushed me against the wall. Warden Mills's jaw tightened. And the blade, where did that come from? Cherry's eyes filled with fresh tears. I don't know, maybe he dropped it or maybe it was already there. I just saw it on the ground, and when he came at me again I grabbed it. I was terrified. I just kept striking until he stopped moving. I didn't want to kill him, I swear I didn't. I was just trying to survive. It was a good story, compelling even. The kind of story that would make headlines and turn public opinion in her favor. But Miriam had heard 1,000 stories like this in her career, and she'd learned to spot the truth hidden beneath the lies. And this story had holes big enough to drive a truck through. Let me ask you something, Cherry, Miriam said, stepping closer to the table. If Officer Sam attacked you, if he was violent and aggressive like you say, why don't you have any defensive wounds? No bruises on your wrists from where he grabbed you, no marks on your neck from where he might have choked you, just that one little scratch on your arm. Cherry's eyes flickered just for a moment, but she recovered quickly. I don't know, maybe I just bruised slowly, maybe the adrenaline. And Sam, Miriam continued, cutting her off. He's a trained correctional officer, 5 years of experience. If he was really attacking you, really trying to force himself on you, why are there no defensive wounds on his hands? No scratches from you fighting back, no torn skin under your fingernails? Cherry's face hardened slightly, the mask slipping just a fraction. I don't know, maybe he didn't expect me to fight back. Warden Mills leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. Or maybe, Miss Davis, there was no fight at all. Maybe you lured him into that stairwell. Maybe you seduced him, got him vulnerable, and then you killed him in cold blood. Cherry's eyes went wide, her expression shifting to wounded innocence. That's not true, why would I do that? I had nothing against Officer Sam, he was nice to me. That's exactly why, Miriam said quietly. Because he was nice, because he was new, inexperienced with women inmates, and you saw an opportunity. You knew he'd be easier to manipulate than the others. Cherry shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face now. No, 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 you're twisting everything. I was the victim here. He attacked me and I defended myself. That's the truth. But the truth, as it turned out, was written in the evidence, not in Cherry's words. Fam, I need you to stay with me because we're getting to the heart of this tragedy. If this story is hitting you, smash that like button, drop a comment telling me what you think should happen to Cherry, and subscribe because this channel is all about uncovering the truth in stories that matter. Now let's see what the investigators found. While Cherry maintained her innocence in the interrogation room, Officer Rachel Kim and a forensic team were combing through every inch of the stairwell crime scene. They photographed the patterns of the incident, measured the angles of the wounds, and examined the blade that had been found at the scene. And with each piece of evidence they collected, Cherry's story fell apart a little more. Rachel stood in the stairwell, holding a tablet that displayed photos of Sam's wounds. Beside her was Dr. Leonard Shaw, the medical examiner who'd been called in from the county to perform the autopsy. He was a man in his 60s with decades of experience reading the stories that dead bodies told, and what Sam's body was telling him didn't match Cherry's version of events at all. Look at the wound patterns, Dr. Shaw said, pointing to the images on the tablet. Multiple focused injuries, all targeting a vital area of the neck. The angles are consistent with someone delivering the attack with malice, not someone trying to ward off an assault. These wounds were delivered with precision, not panic. Rachel nodded, her stomach churning, so she knew exactly where to strike. Exactly, Dr. Shaw confirmed. The weapon was designed to be lethal. This wasn't someone defending themselves, this was someone executing a kill. What about the blade? Rachel asked. Could she have just found it lying there like she claimed? Dr. Shaw shook his head. The blade was a piece of bed frame filed down to a sharp edge. That takes time and planning. Someone had to smuggle it out of a cell, hide it on their person, and wait for the right moment to use it. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, Officer Kim. This was a premeditated murder. Rachel felt a cold anger settle in her chest. Sam had been a good man, maybe a little naive, but he didn't deserve this. And Cherry had not only killed him, she'd tried to destroy his reputation in the process, painting him as a predator to cover her own crimes. Back in the security office, Officer Diane Brooks was reviewing hours of surveillance footage, looking for anything that might shed light on what had happened before Sam and Cherry entered that stairwell. What she found made her blood run cold. The footage showed Cherry approaching Sam multiple times over the previous 2 weeks, always in subtle ways that wouldn't draw attention. A smile here, a lingering look there, standing just a little too close during head counts. But the most damning footage came from 3 days before the murder. The camera had caught Cherry in the recreation yard, talking to another inmate, a woman named Lisa Morales who'd been at the facility for 6 years. Diane pulled up the footage and enhanced the audio as much as she could. The quality was poor, but she could make out fragments of the conversation. "He's perfect," Cherry had said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "New lonely, probably hasn't been with anyone in months. Give it 2 weeks and I'll have him eating out of my hand." Lisa had laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "And then what? You think they'll transfer you for it?" "Better than that," Cherry had replied. "I'll make it look like self-defense, one dead guard and I'm the victim. They'll probably reduce my sentence for trauma." Deanne replayed the footage 3 times, making sure she'd heard it correctly, and then she burned it to a drive and rushed it to Warden Mills's office. This was the smoking gun they needed, proof that Cherry had been planning Sam's murder days in advance and proof that her self-defense story was nothing but a calculated lie. When Warden Mills saw the footage, his face went pale with rage. He stood up from his desk, his hands clenched into fists. "Get her back in the interrogation room. Now." 30 minutes later, Cherry was back at the metal table, but this time the atmosphere was different. There was no more pretense of sympathy, no more careful questioning. Warden Mills slammed the tablet down in front of her, the footage playing on loop, her own words echoing in the small room. "He's perfect. Give it 2 weeks and I'll have him eating out of my hand." Cherry's face went blank, all the tears and emotion draining away in an instant. She stared at the screen, then looked up at Warden Mills with cold, dead eyes. The mask had finally come off. "So what?" Cherry said, her voice flat and emotionless. "You think that proves anything? I was just talking trash with Lisa. Doesn't mean I actually did it." Miriam stepped forward, her voice hard as steel. "Combined with the forensic evidence, combined with the lack of defensive wounds, combined with the premeditated weapon? Yes, Cherry, it proves everything." Cherry leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was chilling, that smile empty of remorse or humanity. "You know what the funny thing is? He actually thought I liked him. Right up until the moment I struck him, he thought we had some kind of connection. Men are so stupid." Tim, who'd been standing in the corner watching the interrogation, lunged forward with a roar of rage, but Diane and Rachel grabbed him, holding him back. His face was red with fury and grief, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You killed him," Tim shouted. "He was a good man and you killed him for nothing." Cherry just shrugged, completely unbothered. "He was weak. Weak people don't survive in here. I did what I had to do." Warden Mills's voice was ice. "You're going to spend the rest of your life in maximum security for this, Miss Davis, and I'll make sure every prison in the state knows exactly what you are." Cherry's smile didn't waver. "We'll see." As the guards escorted Cherry back to isolation, Warden Mills, Miriam, and Tim stood in the hallway, the weight of Sam's death pressing down on all of them like a physical thing. "How do we stop this from happening again?" Tim asked, his voice broken. "How do we protect our people from monsters like her?" Miriam was quiet for a long moment, then she spoke, her voice heavy with years of hard-earned wisdom. "We can't threaten them, we can't intimidate them. They've seen it all and they're not afraid anymore. The only thing we have left is compassion. We have to remember that even in a place like this, people are still people. Some can be reached, some can be saved, but we have to be smarter, more careful, and we can never, ever underestimate them." But was compassion really the answer? Or had the system become so broken that no amount of kindness could fix what had been shattered? The answer would haunt them all for years to come. The courtroom was packed with people who'd come to see justice served, or at least to witness the spectacle of a woman who'd murdered a prison guard in cold blood. Cherry sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her, her face a mask of bored indifference. She didn't look at the gallery where Sam's family sat, his mother weeping quietly into her hands, his younger sister staring at Cherry with eyes full of hatred and grief. Cherry didn't care about their pain, didn't care about the life she'd taken, and as the prosecutor laid out the evidence against her piece by devastating piece, she showed no remorse whatsoever. The jury would deliberate for less than 3 hours before returning with a verdict that surprised no one, guilty on all counts, and Cherry would be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. But even as they led her away, even as Sam's family finally felt some small measure of closure, the questions that haunted everyone who'd known Sam remained unanswered. How had a good man fallen into such a perfect trap, and what did his death reveal about the system that was supposed to protect both guards and inmates alike? 6 months after Sam's death, the Los Angeles Women's Correctional Facility held a memorial service in his honor. It was a quiet affair, attended by the staff who'd worked alongside him during his brief time there, and by Tim, who'd driven all the way from Texas to pay his respects. A small plaque was mounted on the wall near the entrance, bearing Sam's name and the dates of his service, a reminder to every guard who walked through those doors that danger could come from the most unexpected places. Warden Mills stood at the podium, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. Officer Sam was a dedicated correctional officer who believed in doing his job with integrity and compassion. He came to this facility hoping for a fresh start, and instead he lost his life to someone who exploited his decency and his trust. We honor his memory today, but we also commit ourselves to learning from this tragedy so that it never happens again. After the service, Warden Mills, Marianne McCluskey, Tim, and officers Diane Brooks and Rachel Kim gathered in a small conference room to discuss the changes that would be implemented in the wake of Sam's murder. The atmosphere was somber, but there was also a sense of determination, a shared commitment to making sure that Sam's death meant something. We've reviewed every policy, every procedure, Warden Mills said, pulling out a thick folder of documents. The stairwell where Sam was killed is now covered by cameras. We've eliminated all blind spots in the facility. No guard will ever be alone in an unsupervised area with an inmate again. Rachel nodded. We've also implemented mandatory training for all new officers, specifically focused on manipulation tactics used by inmates. They need to understand that kindness doesn't mean vulnerability, and that setting boundaries isn't cruelty. Diane added, we're rotating staff more frequently too, so inmates can't build long-term manipulation strategies with specific guards, and we're doing psychological evaluations on inmates who show patterns of predatory behavior. Tim listened to all of this, his face drawn and tired. He'd aged 10 years in the last 6 months, the weight of Sam's death pressing down on him like a stone. It's good, he said quietly, but it doesn't bring him back. Mariam reached across the table and placed her hand on Tim's. No, it doesn't, but it might save the next person, and that's all we can do now, learn and adapt and try to be better. Tim nodded, but his eyes were distant, lost in memories of the young man he'd mentored and failed to protect. Sam was a good officer, he just wanted to help people. How do we teach guards to keep that compassion without it getting them killed? Mariam was quiet for a long moment, considering the question that had haunted her for her entire career. We teach them that compassion and caution aren't opposites, she finally said. You can care about someone's humanity without letting your guard down. You can treat people with dignity without trusting them blindly. It's a balance, and it's hard, but it's the only way to survive in this job. Warden Mills closed the folder and looked at each person in the room. Sam's death revealed something we all knew but didn't want to admit. This system is broken in ways that go beyond policy and procedure. These women. Many of them have been failed by every institution they've ever encountered. They've learned that manipulation and violence are the only tools that work. And until we address the root causes, until we give them real opportunities for rehabilitation and redemption, we're just managing chaos. So what do? Rachel asked. How do we fix something this broken? We start small, Mariam said. We start by seeing them as people, not just inmates. We start by offering real education, real therapy, real pathways to something better than the lives they had before. And yes, we stay vigilant, we protect ourselves, but we don't give up on the possibility that some of them can change. It was an idealistic answer, maybe even a naive one, but it was the only answer that made sense in a system that had lost its way. Hey my people, we're coming to the end of Sam's story, and I want to thank you for taking this journey with me. If this story moved you, if it made you think, drop a like and leave a comment telling me what you learned from Sam's tragedy. And please subscribe to this channel because we're building a community that values real stories, hard truths, and the kind of conversations that matter. Now let's bring this home. 3 years later, Cherry sat in her cell in a maximum security facility in Northern California, a place designed for the most dangerous and violent offenders in the state. She had no privileges, no yard time with other inmates, no opportunities to manipulate or harm anyone ever again. She spent 23 hours a day in a concrete box, with 1 hour for solitary exercise in a cage barely bigger than her cell. It was the closest thing to hell that the justice system could legally provide, and Cherry had earned every second of it. But even in isolation, even with all her power stripped away, Cherry remained unrepentant. When a prison psychologist came to evaluate her, hoping to understand what had driven her to kill Sam, Cherry had simply smiled that same cold, empty smile and said, "He was weak. I did the world a favor." The psychologist had closed her notebook and left, knowing that some people were beyond saving, beyond redemption, beyond any human connection that might bring them back from the darkness they'd chosen to inhabit. Cherry was one of those people, and she would die alone in that cell, forgotten by everyone except the people whose lives she'd destroyed. Meanwhile, back at the Los Angeles Women's Correctional Facility, life went on. New guards were hired and trained with Sam's story as a cautionary tale. New inmates arrived, some hardened and manipulative, others genuinely seeking a second chance. Officers Diane Brooks and Rachel Kim continued their work, carrying the lessons of Sam's death with them every single day, never forgetting that behind every smile, every plea for help, every moment of apparent vulnerability, there could be a trap waiting to spring. Marianne McCluskey eventually retired after 30 years in corrections, but before she left, she wrote a comprehensive training manual based on everything she'd learned throughout her career. She dedicated it to Sam, and to all the other guards who'd fallen victim to the predators who lived behind bars. The manual became required reading for every new correctional officer in California, and it saved lives in ways that could never be fully measured. Tim returned to Texas and continued supervising guards at the maximum security facility, but he was different now, more cautious, more aware of the vulnerabilities that even good people carried with them into dangerous places. He told Sam's story to every new recruit, not to scare them, but to prepare them for the reality that compassion without wisdom could be fatal. And Sam's family, they carried his memory in their hearts, remembering him not as a victim, but as a man who'd tried to do good in a world that didn't always reward goodness. His mother kept his corrections officer badge on her mantle, and every year on the anniversary of his death, she lit a candle and said a prayer for all the men and women who walked into prisons every day, risking their lives to maintain order in places where chaos reigned supreme. The truth about Sam's death was complicated and painful, but it was also necessary. He'd been a good man brought down by his own decency, by his inability to see that not everyone who smiled at him had kind intentions, and by a system that hadn't adequately prepared him for the psychological warfare that inmates like Cherry waged every single day. His death wasn't in vain, though, because it forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, about the limits of compassion, and about the price that good people sometimes paid when they underestimated evil. In the end, Sam's story became a lesson that echoed through prison systems across the country. Be vigilant, trust but verify. Compassion is strength, but naivety is fatal. And never ever forget that behind bars, the most dangerous weapon isn't a shank or a blade, it's the human mind, capable of deception so complete that you won't see the trap until it's already closed around you. Sam had learned that lesson too late, but his death ensured that thousands of other guards would learn it in time to save their own lives. Was justice truly served when Cherry was locked away forever, or had the system failed Sam long before he ever met her? The answer depended on who you asked, but one thing was certain. Sam's story would never be forgot, and his sacrifice would continue to protect the guards who walked in his footsteps, making sure that his death was the last of its kind, or at least that was the hope everyone carried with them as they continued the difficult, dangerous work of keeping order in places where darkness lived and breathed and waited patiently for the next vulnerable soul to wander into its reach. Rest in peace, Officer Sam. Your story has been told, and your legacy will live on in every guard who learns from your tragedy and chooses wisdom over innocence, caution over blind trust, and survival over the deadly comfort of believing that good intentions are enough to protect you from those who see kindness as nothing more than a weakness to exploit.